Hey, welcome to this week's Film Fanatics. We are three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, Melissa McCarthy goes undercover in Spy. The third installment of the Insidious story is here. A Life of Playing on Sesame Street is the subject of a new documentary, and we review one of the most acclaimed horror films of the year, The Babadook. Our triple feature of older films is Cuban Fury, Justin's old classic pick, Snatch, and Oscar-nominated Away from Her. In honor of Insidious Chapter 3, our top 5 this week is the all-time worst number 3s in a film series. That should be a fun one. First up, we're going to start with Spy, and Joe's going to have that one for us.
Because no doubt it's the highest grossing this weekend.
Yes, about $30 million.
Which is why I'm glad we didn't leave with Entourage.
No, we're going to wait for Entourage till next week because who cares?
Precisely.
I like that way of thinking. Spy is an American action comedy written and directed by Paul Feig, who did Heat and Bridesmaids, which, have a relative success. So naturally that brings back Melissa McCarthy in the starring role. Also Jason Statham, Rose Byrne, Bobby Cannavale, Allison Janney, and Jude Law as well. The film is about the transformation of a desk-bound CIA analyst named Susan Cooper, who's played by McCarthy, who becomes a field agent in an attempt to foil a black market sale of a suitcase nuclear weapon. I was really surprised because this movie apparently got really, really, really good reviews, really high marks.
95% on Rotten, yeah.
Yeah, it was wow. Well, honestly not as successful as I thought it was going to be. And my response was, it's pretty good. It was I thought it was funny. I thought most of the jokes worked for the most part. I think that, I know, Justin, you thought there were some reservations about the balance between kind of the serious story and the action comedy element between previous films like The Heat. So I'm curious to see your take on that. I thought it was about the same as that. I will say I liked The Heat a little bit more, though, because I really liked the dynamic between McCarthy and Bullock. I thought that they had a lot to play off there. I really enjoyed that. I'm still not sure if she really carried the movie quite as much herself, but there were a lot of other characters there that had a lot of funny lines to keep things moving well. Mm-hmm. For me, personally, I thought Jason Statham was hilarious.
He was on a roll the whole movie.
I loved his gag, and I thought that there were a lot of fun lines. There was some good action, but, on the whole, I don't think it really did anything that was groundbreaking, and I leave it with a B+.
Okay. Justin?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because this entire movie I was thinking, first off, what will this mean for the upcoming Ghostbusters movie? And two, can Feig learn from The Heat? I think there are good things about The Heat, but I really do think it's got a very, very noticeable imbalance between comedy and action. The Heat, as I mentioned in the review, felt like a comedy with action sequences. Spy feels like a legitimate action comedy. What I really do love about this movie, though, is for once Melissa McCarthy has played a character I can actually get behind. In all of her other movies, she seemed to be playing this kind of white trash, in The Heat, basically borderline psychopath character that we're basically forced to get behind because she's supposedly funny, and hope for the goodness that she can go completely off the cuff. This feels like it has a really solid script, they spent some time on it, and it leads to some really good gags. They don't play her as this superhuman woman, they play her as an everyday basement woman who uses her own skills within there to shine in the field, which I think is a great motif and leads to some really awesome action sequences that benefits well with the humor, particularly in the interplay with both Rose Byrne and Jason Statham.
Good.
However, there's still the action component.
Uh-oh.
The good news is it's a massive improvement over The Heat. However, I still don't feel like Feig has come into his form with action. A lot of the action sequences still felt like he wasn't entirely sure where he was going with them, and a lot of the time I felt like he was just trying to do an Edgar Wright impersonation with the use of really, really graphic shock humor at times. I'm sorry, when this movie is more violent than Skyfall, you got to tone it down a little bit.
I will admit there was one scene that I thought was supposed to be comedic, but I thought it was kind of shocking. There's when she's fighting in the kitchen.
Yes.
There's this one really gory moment that kind of disrupted the whole tone.
I actually thought that was kind of funny, but
I don't know. I thought.
And you know me in the gore.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird.
But I mean, overall, I do think that this was a very pleasant surprise in the summer. It definitely has me thinking that Feig might be able to pull off Ghostbusters after all, and Melissa McCarthy can actually be funny. Shocker from a hater. I leave it with a B+.
I know you do really hate Melissa McCarthy. I'm glad one movie finally turned the tide a little bit. But when we reviewed the woefully underwhelming Tammy last summer, I made the comment that McCarthy movies work for her audience because they pair her with these likable co-stars. Joe, you mentioned Sandra Bullock in The Heat. Jason Bateman was in Identity Thief. She was with Susan Sarandon for a lot of Tammy, but it was billed as McCarthy's sole vehicle. With Spy, she doesn't really have one specific co-star, more like a myriad of great actors and actresses, all of which you mentioned, Joe, that bob and weave in and out of scenes with her, and each one brings something to the table. But McCarthy has great chemistry with every last one, and that is the greatest strength of Spy. To say nothing of a truly fun spy story, some strong gags. Justin, you're correct. It is a very good action comedy. I think the balance is good here. And it's worth pointing out also British comedy actress Miranda Hart, who makes her Hollywood debut here as Nancy, her friend, absolutely stands toe-to-toe with McCarthy. I never saw her before, but she does a lot of TV shows in Britain. But like most McCarthy movies, not all of the bits work, but unlike a lot of R-rated comedies that we see, at least here, the pace is so brisk that when something doesn't work, it's just a quick moment until the next gag fires. Now, does Feig rely a little too heavy on McCarthy's improvisational skills and potty mouth? As usual, he does, but honestly, I think this is one that will definitely hold up on repeat viewings. By far, for me, it's the best adult comedy of the year, and I as well give it a B+. I do think it's slightly better than The Heat. I agree with you there, Justin.
Nah.
I know, you love The Heat. You do.
Well, I think that you're right. She has great chemistry with everybody, but I like the consistency of the interplay between two characters. I think it was good for growth.
I can appreciate that.
But actually, one thing I do want to ask you guys, though.
Yeah, please.
Because we're all pretty much on the same page here. I don't think any of us would think this is like the best movie ever, though. Because it seems by rating indicators that this is like universally loved.
But to offer a brief counterpoint, Joe, just because it has high rating indicators such as Rotten Tomatoes, it doesn't necessarily define how positive they considered it.
Correct.
That's true. But,
I mean, if you look at one of the highest mainstream films of the last few years, The Muppets with Jason Segel, has a 98%. But then if you look at the actual reviews, a lot of them are like in the B+B type of range.
I see.
So, yeah, that's just sort of how Rotten Tomatoes does it. I mean, I like their system, but it is a bit flawed, I guess, in that sense.
It's growing on me, but I do notice some of the flaws. I wish they also picked better critics as a focal point. But I mean, I do think that 95% for just in terms of positive reviews is warranted.
Yeah.
It is a funny movie. I definitely enjoyed myself while watching it. I would probably watch it again.
But here's the thing. Since We're the Millers, maybe, which is week 1 of the show, I mean, have we reviewed a new release R-rated comedy that's been that good? Horrible Bosses 2, Sex Tape, Tammy, Million Ways to Die in the West. I mean, there hasn't been a good adult comedy in a long time.
maybe that's why.
Honestly. And, you know, 22 Jump Street, I guess, is the only one I can think of.
Yeah,
since we've started doing the show.
Even that's kind of, I think,
that
a
was a
lower
sequel.
Demographic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in terms of original content, I think Spy really has hit on something. And I do admit that The Heat is funny, but Justin's right. I mean, a lot of these characters that McCarthy has played over the years, I think her movies are funny. I think she's funny. But this is the first more realistic character, I think, that we've seen her play. Certainly on the big screen.
More or less.
I mean, other than like St. Vincent, but I mean in terms of her big, broad comedies.
Yeah.
That was St. Vincent was actually going to be the go-to for like, okay, this was the movie that made me think, hey, there might be more to her than I'm giving her credit for. But then again, in St. Vincent, she had maybe 30 minutes of screen time.
Yeah, she was a co-star for sure. Supporting, I should say.
So how fair that statement actually is, I don't know. But I mean, this definitely got me rethinking her comedy-wise.
Mm-hmm.
I can actually buy her character in this instead of in The Heat, where it's like, how did you get here?
Well, she put away a lot of people.
That's right. High success rate.
Yeah.
High success rate at basically tearing the city apart at the same time.
Hey, Batman's the same way.
It works.
Batman doesn't work with the police, though.
Actually, he's a deputy, sir.
Depending on the interpretation.
Okay.
Anywho, we won't fight for the next 2 hours.
Up next, we're going to talk about Insidious Chapter 3. Justin?
Taking place several years before the main events of the last 2 movies, Chapter 3 focuses on Quinn, played by Stephanie Scott, a young girl trying to communicate with her late mother with the help of reluctant psychic Elise. played by the very, very talented Lin Shaye. However, as things turn increasingly chaotic for Quinn and her family, Elise must come out of retirement and venture into the supernatural world known in the Insidious universe as the Further. Lee Winnell, who's been a writer and co-star of the last several movies as well as other James Wan projects, steps into the director's chair this time round, and the result is kind of underwhelming. He's clearly trying to emulate Wan's directing style, trying to have this sort of like Neo take on Alfred Hitchcock, but it just doesn't have the same creep factor or the same atmosphere Wan put together with his movies, and it makes the first, I'd say at least 40 minutes, seriously drag, particularly because I feel like this is really Shaye's story, and for the first half of the movie, she's super swept to the side, but when we finally get to the second half of Act 2 and to the climax, she really gets to come into her own and really allows it to shine in ways that honestly give Sigourney Weaver a run for her money.
Whoa.
So I feel like the biggest issue for this movie, just in terms of being a part of the franchise, is for being a prequel in terms of shedding new light on ideas and concepts in the Insidious universe. It just doesn't have that much interesting to say. We get a little bit more on Lin Shaye's character, and I do think she gets a lot of time to shine in the finale, but honestly, it just feels like another run-of-the-mill story, and I feel like there's really nowhere else to go in the Insidious universe. Chapter 2 more or less wrapped everything up cinematically wise. I'd rather see Insidious take the form of a TV series. I think it sets itself up for it, and you can have various supernatural entities each week. In this one, it's just, let's come up with some random monster to throw into the mesh that you haven't seen before and hope something works. I leave Insidious Chapter 3 with a C.
Yeah, it's basically a standalone movie. I guess it's a prequel in theory, but yeah, it doesn't add really anything to the Insidious lore, I guess you could say. But all I can really say about the whole thing is thank goodness for Lin Shaye. It's not that Insidious Chapter 3 is necessarily that bad, but it relies way too heavily on stupid jump scares and a very weak, like, father-daughter at odds with each other storyline.
It's a terrible dynamic.
In fact, the entire Brenner family is completely generic. The tech-savvy brother, the father just struggling to survive without his wife in this workaday world. Like, it's all so generic. But then when Shaye shows up, the movie suddenly becomes a masterclass in horror acting. The scenes she has when she's in the Further are some of the best of the series. And what made the first Insidious so great that it was truly scary from start to finish. It took its time to build up the scares, and the payoff was great. But here, like halfway through when Specs and Tucker show up, not my favorite part of the series at all. Maybe because the actor playing Specs directed this film, like Justin mentioned, but they start focusing on comedy for a couple of minutes. And for me, it didn't work at all. I think Chapter 3 is the worst of the series, but not that far off of 2, thanks to Shaye. I'll leave it with a C+. Joe?
What did you give Chapter 2, just out of curiosity?
I believe it was a B-.
Okay.
I did not like Insidious 2.
I do recall that. A C-, I believe, from you.
That's right.
Yeah.
I like this one better.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It doesn't really add a whole lot new, but I just think that it really was structured better because you know how the second part was basically just kind of continuing on from the first one, and it felt a little disjointed for me. This one, you're right, it's pretty by the numbers, but I actually like the characters. I can't really say that it was like the best acted or the best written, but I don't know. I got behind them. Okay, I liked the girl. I thought
yeah, I mean, she did a good job.
She was likable. I mean, It's
just her character was flat.
I cared about what happened to her. I mean, that was enough for me. And I do agree with you. Once she actually comes in, it does become a much better movie. And I actually really like the two Ghost Hunter guys. They're so cheesy. They add some of that levity to the series because it's so scary. I like them. I mean, they're two geeks because they're totally out of their game, but they still can help.
They didn't bother me as much in 1 or 2 as they did here.
I don't know.
I don't know why.
Here's my biggest issue with them. The first one, they're sort of like they're relatively by the numbers. They're a little quirky, but you can tell they're trying to do their job. 2, they get like 2 or 3 really, really random puns. Like in the finale of Chapter 2, they're like bumbling around and trying to be heroes, and it's just bizarre.
It's hilarious. I find them to be hilarious. I think it's a kind of a fun in-joke or something. And I did like the Masters of the Universe, the rare T-shirt.
I knew you would.
That was they even go on about that towards the end of the movie. It's pretty good. Yeah, this one was decent. I think the biggest flaw of the movie though was that it wasn't really that scary.
Not really.
But I enjoyed watching it. I have to give it a B-.
Okay. I thought the parts when she was in the further were pretty scary.
Spooky.
Spooky. I mean, I think she adds a level of intensity to those scenes.
True.
That maybe wouldn't have been there.
Well, what I always think is really interesting about the Further in all three movies is there's always something new brought to the table. It's never the exact same experience.
True.
Takes you further.
Yes, it does. I think that 2 is better as a companion piece to 1.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas this is, like we said, pretty much a standalone movie. You could watch this without having any previous knowledge of the franchise and be fine with it.
Yeah.
Whereas 2, I feel like, as a standalone movie, does not work that well. But as paired with 1, I think does a better job.
That was my biggest problem with the second one, was that I felt if you didn't see the first one, you'd be really
You were
confused.
kind of lost, yeah. And I agree with that, and that's why I didn't really like the second one all that much.
I mean, I think the second one might have been a little scarier than this one.
The second one gave me chills a number of times.
Oh, yeah, the second one has some definitely creepy moments. It's just... I felt like with the second one, it was more or less 2 separate movies.
Yeah.
But they just tried to cram so much into one and it felt rushed.
Maybe you guys can refresh my memory. Is the old woman like her arch enemy? Because they seem to kind of...
Basically.
Because I kind of felt like that was really more the family's problem in the first 2 movies. Because you thought it was like the demon in the first one, but it was actually the old woman.
Yeah.
That was really the main focus. And yet somehow it was really not even her focus to go after the family.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know. I mean...
We sort of learned that at the end of 2.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, it's not all that put together well as a series.
Yeah, just
I feel like.
still a lot of questions for me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But maybe that's why you need chapter 4
Do we,
to
though?
go. I don't think so, but,
I guess we probably will, because probably made money.
Not really.
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, they're made on a shoestring budget, so I mean...
Well, did they make
I would
a profit?
imagine Chapter 3 is going to break even to some degree. It's just a matter of...
It opened at $23 million. I'm sure it broke even Friday. These movies are made for $5 million.
That's true.
There's no doubt it's making money hand over fist, like all horror movies do.
So they
pretty
could
much.
easily
That's why they
pump
crank
out-
them out.
They could pump out a fourth one, then, I
know.
guess, probably.
If you guys have never seen Lin Shaye's comedy chops, she was a big Farrelly Brothers performer. Kingpin, There's Something About Mary, Dumb and Dumber.
Classic.
So yeah, she can do more than horror.
She gets around.
Certainly, she's great in this role. All right, up next we have I Am Big Bird, the Carol Spinney story. And this is exactly what the title implies. It is a documentary about the man who has played Big Bird, and incidentally Oscar the Grouch as well, for more than 45 years, and is now 80 and still going strong with these characters. It's a great look into Spinney's beginnings on local television and the Bozo the Clown Show, how he got introduced to Jim Henson, and some interesting tidbits about his personal life as well, and features lots of archive footage and interviews mixed in with new interviews with everyone from his children and the original cast of Sesame to Spinney's eventual replacement, who's been waiting in the wings for him to retire for nearly 20 years now. The movie is pleasant and, like Sesame Street itself, has an incredibly strong heart. But my issue with it is really no fault of Spinney's. It's just that there's no real turmoil or drama in his life now, or it seems ever. The doc doesn't really come off as syrupy. It just is a very pleasant story about a very pleasant man whose entire life has been to make children happy.
I.e. a little boring?
Well, I'll get to that.
Okay.
I will. I think the movie also tends to veer off course a few times, talking about Jim Henson for a bit here, or Sesame Street's success as a whole there, which may indicate maybe an hour-long TV bio might do for Spinney rather than a full-length movie. But in any event, for Muppet enthusiasts, including myself, it is a must. For everybody else, I'm not sure. I actually leave it with a B. Justin?
Although Jim Henson's been gone for many, many years, his legacy lives on. And I Am Big Bird, I feel like, is living proof of that. Unlike Being Elmo, a documentary I thought was good, albeit somewhat overrated,
I enjoyed it.
the documentary focuses on Carol Spinney, warts and all. focusing on a lot of different things in his life. I disagree, Dan. I feel like there is some tension with him in terms of how he's portraying these characters, his relations with the people in his life, and how that ultimately turns into the man he becomes. And giving insights into how the show was structured, why his characters were so important, which was a concept I found fascinating, particularly when talking about there's no way Oscar the Grouch would have gotten greenlit in this day and age for television. And just how much it can be possible to truly do what you love for a living, which is one thing I loved about this. He's a really inspirational, good-hearted individual that really is passionate about everything that he's doing. Though at just shy of 90 minutes, I really wish there was more time to further develop Spinny's fascinating life. I would have loved to hear a bit more with the father dynamic that they just sort of...
Yeah, they brush it over.
They brush it over, but they do come back to it eventually. It's just sort of there and it's gone. But as a whole, I Am Big Bird is a wonderful documentary about a man who brought world-renowned icons to life. I live with a B+.
Well, I mean, yeah, they touch for like a minute on that he had some issues with the Sesame Street people, in terms of Oscar the Grouch, and, you should have Big Bird do this. But it wasn't like, there wasn't a lot of tension there. And keep in mind, I've talked about this on the show when we've reviewed Muppets films, but I did read the Jim Henson bio, so, I mean, a lot of stuff wasn't necessarily news to me that maybe it would be to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But I will say this, and I think this part of the movie I can appreciate more than you, Justin, is that when they did the Big Bird in China special.
Oh, yeah.
When Mr. Hooper died, I was 6. I was and my brother was 4. I was firmly entrenched in the Sesame Street world. I mean, at 6, it's not like I was watching it every day, but it was still on in the house.
Oh, yeah.
And Mr. Hooper was quite literally the first, person in my life, quote unquote, that died. And reliving the episode where they explain it to Big Bird in this movie had me crying because it just brought back all these memories. So that part, like, for somebody like of my generation that grew up with those events, I think maybe it would hit a little more at home, which is why I say, like, I think just for a general... Joe, I'm not sure how you would feel about it. You didn't get to see it. I'm not sure if it would grab you or if you'd be like, well, it's nice. He's a nice guy. He's doing what he loves. That's awesome. But, I mean, you saw the Elmo documentary. I do feel like the Elmo documentary is a little bit better. And I think maybe because... I mean, obviously, Carol Spinney's, I guess, a better person in general. But I don't know. There was something maybe about the tone of this. Like, the music was very dramatic at parts that didn't necessarily need to be... You grew up on Sesame Street, I assume, like everyone on Earth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I thought the Elmo documentary was kind of inspirational because it seemed like the guy had very, very humble beginnings, and to see him actually work towards his dream, I don't know how, in comparison...
Maybe that's what it was, because we don't learn a lot about the past. Most of it is focused on the Sesame Street years, which is fine. That's what he's known for.
Oh, yeah.
But, like when I was reading the Henson bio... I found the stuff pre-Muppets fascinating. Like when he was doing local shows. Like I would have liked to see more with the Bozo the Clown stuff or, about how he started.
With the Elmo one of my biggest issues was they didn't... I mean, you accuse this one of little tension. The Being Elmo one is essentially, look how wonderful this man is. And
yes, there's no tension in the Elmo one either. I agree.
I mean, in this one, you at least get some degree... He at least feels like a 100% individual who has flaws, who has had issues. I love the fact that they brought up that when he started out, he was... The only one who actually believed in him was Jim Henson. Everyone else thought he was going to last like a week.
That sounds like Jim Henson, though.
Right, again, that's more of a... Let's talk about Jim Henson and how great he is. I understand that is great that Henson saw that in him, but I feel like... There were parts of this that were more focused on other things rather than Spinny or Big Bird. The Elmo documentary focused on Kevin Clash and the Elmo character.
But also Kevin Clash is known for Elmo. Spinny's known for Big Bird and Oscar, which wasn't in the advertising, but is still an important component.
It is, but the movie's also called I Am Big Bird.
Fair enough.
It's sort of like Nimoy's book, I Am Spock, talking about his other project. You know what I mean? Like, okay, yes, you've done other things, but we know you because you're Spock, I guess, you know?
That's true, but I feel like there's still ways you can transition into deeper things. Like, to talk about Big Bird, you have to talk about Sesame Street. You have to bring in Jim Henson to some degree. I don't think it would be a fair documentary if you didn't.
I agree, but, you know, there were also a lot of people other than Jim Henson involved in Sesame Street.
Such as the director, which they do more with than they do with the father, but...
That's true.
I would have also loved to see more with that.
Also, I like seeing all my old friends from Sesame Street. They all still look pretty good, to be honest.
Surprisingly.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the Babadook. That is our home media moment, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Well, The Babadook, you may have heard of it, is a 2014 Australian-Canadian psychological horror film, which explains why the accents were kind of all over the place for me. It was written and directed by Jennifer Kent, in which a woman and her son are tormented by an evil entity. Does it sound like every other generic horror movie about a ghost? Well, it kind of is, and it kind of isn't. Really, what I could say that makes this different is just the Babadook is kind of integrated in just old folk tales, and it's just, they come across this magical book in which she reads it to her son, but it turns out it's not just a book. Somehow it's kind of ensnared the creature into the house. Basically almost like a portal to another dimension. It's actually similar to, you know, The Further and Insidious and a lot of other sort of things. Poltergeist came to mind. But the Babadook, the thing that's really different about this is that even though the Babadook is a very unique and scary, honestly, entity, it's really more about the woman's slow descent into madness because she has a son and a situation following her husband's death that really builds the tension. And you aren't even completely sure if there would be necessarily a supernatural component to lead to the horror. The horror seems very natural, and the Babadook is kind of almost just a background to that to add a little bit more of a supernatural element. But the real terror here is in the concept of the madness and the mental illness and just the tension, seeing, is this woman going crazy, and what's going to happen? Really, this movie did have a lot of thrills. It was very unique in its atmosphere and rather enjoyable. Unfortunately, it did kind of leave me asking a few questions. I wanted a little bit more about the Babadook, but on the whole, I think it delivered about as well as it could. The only reason I wouldn't give it my absolute perfect grade is because the kid that they got, even though he did do his job of playing an annoying brat well, he did look like he was laughing half the time. And, you know, I thought his performance wasn't the best I've seen from child actors, so I will leave it with an A.
Okay, Justin?
For the first time in at least half a decade, there has finally come a horror film that has legitimately scared me. This, I think, is to the benefit of both the brilliant performances of Davis and Wiseman as the mother and her son. Really great method actors, and I feel like it does really bring the horror to life. It's not about bloodshed or many, many deaths. It's about these really awesome subtleties and bringing this really clever psychological component to it that I really, really got into as the film went along. What I did honestly think was one of the greatest benefits of generating terror for this was just how minimal they actually showed you of the initial Babadook. They really let the performances shine through, and it led to some really powerful scenes that showcased both the acting talent as well as we talked about with Insidious, really showing that you can have great performances in horror. Unfortunately, in doing so and building up the horror and tension, the film does drag for about the first act, which I would say is not so much a horror film as more or less a psychological character study. When I saw it, I drew a lot of comparisons to The Exorcist, but ultimately pays off in a great finale that ties it all together. I leave it with an A-.
Well, yeah, I mean, you guys both kind of said it here. I won't, give too many extra thoughts, but in the last couple of weeks here, we've had that disastrous Poltergeist remake.
Ooh.
We already talked about Insidious Chapter 3 today, but these are both, pretty standard horror fare. Finally comes, I would say, the best horror movie in years, and I'm including It Follows here as well. The Babadook is original, it has a fantastic story, and it is incredibly scary. What a lot of horror films seem to forget while they're trying to pad as many jump scares in as they can is that they also have to give us characters that we care about.
True.
And you said it, Joe. The Babadook gives us this great mother-son story, and we are watching the mother sort of descend into madness and it becomes psychological as well as frightening. These are characters that we truly want to defeat this evil. The villain is frightening, and it does help that we don't necessarily see it all the time. The scares are legitimate, and it is a very dark movie, like lighting-wise, but I just thought that added to the suspense. I give The Babadook an A. It's the first horror movie I've given an A in a couple of years.
Conjuring?
Conjuring was the last one, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It Follows was really good, which, we talked about, but I just... And Justin, I think this was one of your main problems with it as well. It was not that scary. It was spooky.
It was spooky and it was creepy. It just wasn't that. It just wasn't that legitimately scary.
This movie is frightening.
No, I got some legitimate chills at times. It may have been because I was watching it in the dark to build it up. But
you should watch a horror movie in the dark. It helps.
Oh yeah, and this one especially.
But I don't think that the first part really drags at all while they're sort of building the suspense. See, I kind of like that in a horror movie.
Yeah.
I'm tired of horror movies thinking that within the first 8 minutes, we have to be crawling out of our skin. It doesn't have to be like that.
No, you can build it up.
Yes.
I just felt like with this one, you're expecting a horror film, and for the first half hour, 40 minutes, give or take, it's more or less a psychological character study. That's not a bad thing, mind you. It's just not what you're expecting. And both, I think, honestly, do complement each other in the end game in terms of understanding these characters at the start versus at the end when it's much more tension-filled. It's just I wish there was a stronger way to draw audiences in instead of focusing on these characters sort of just going about their day.
Conjuring was kind of like that.
Yeah, Conjuring was like that. That's a good point. It drew me in because I was invested, like I said, in these characters. It didn't necessarily... You're right. I mean, the first half hour wasn't, freaking me out that much. Although, the tone of, the atmosphere is still kind of creepy.
It's creepy.
And I think the lighting has something to do with that. I think the creepiness of the book itself has something to do with that.
Oh, yeah, especially with the book.
So, I don't think that's necessarily all that the first part of the movie is doing is, giving us a psychological thriller-type aspect as opposed to horror. I think that it's giving us both at the same time.
I think as we get closer to the second half of the movie, it does that a little bit better, particularly with phone calls, but without giving anything away.
Yeah.
The grudge clicking has been dethroned.
I don't know. I thought that it was definitely spooky. I liked the fact that they were trying to kind of echo some of the dark, scary crevices of our childhoods. The Babadook seems like a very realistic boogeyman we might have read about. But I didn't really think it was that scary. I thought it was atmospherically creepy.
Okay.
It Follows scared me more.
Interesting.
The concept scared me more.
Okay.
To be honest. Because, it followed you everywhere.
It did follow you everywhere.
Well, it also goes into my theory of unbeatable villain.
Okay.
It Follows pretty much unbeatable. Babadook, there are ways to get around it, and they do actually show a legitimate fight. It's not just, it's here, it may not be here,
okay.
It's kind of here,
well,
then it's gone.
No. I see what you're saying. No, I'll give you this. I think that the way they resolve the conflict in the Babadook is a very good message. I think you can take away with the theme of the storybook monster, which we all have to deal with, which is great for the resolution for the story, but nothing to worry about at the end. It Follows, well...
It may or may not.
It may or may not be following you. I think for a horror movie to have that little bit of ambiguity...
The unbeatable villain thing never really bothered me as much as it bothers certainly Justin. I think, Joe, you're not a huge fan of it either, if I remember from Unfriended. But it never really bothered me that much, because to me that just adds to the tension and the...
how do you get out of it?
How do you get out of it? You can't. Okay, well, let's see how long you can last.
Well,
let's see
to be
what
fair,
you can try.
I'll be honest. The only real contemporary horror film that concept really bothers me with more than any other is Sinister.
But Sinister's such a great movie.
I actually like Sinister a lot.
Because literally, in Sinister, you have two options. You can die or you can go crazy.
And
there is no in between.
That's why it's scary, because you
frightening.
can't get out of it, man.
Yeah.
And hey, one of my favorite slashers of all time is kind of unbeatable. It's Freddy. You either...
You don't believe in Freddy.
No.
They have brought up Freddy's weakness several times, in fact.
It's stupid, though. That's the thing. Really, you sleep or you don't sleep,
All right, well, let's move on here. We've got our top 5 this week, and it is a top 5 worst list. We don't do those too often, but they are pretty fun when we do.
That's right.
And this time, in honor of Insidious Chapter 3, not that it was horrible, but, thought we'd turn the tables here and do the top 5 worst number 3s in a series. And we did have one sort of caveat to this, and that is it can't be the third film in a planned trilogy, like a Hobbit or The Dark Knight. So we're sort of focusing on movies without a planned trilogy. They could be a trilogy, perhaps, but for other reasons. I'll start this one, I guess. My number 5 is going to be Spider-Man 3. This ended up being a trilogy because of the disastrous
Corporate bullying.
Corporate bullying and the not great response from the fans of Spider-Man 3.
Sony, basically.
And Sony, yeah. They, needed to reboot it a few years later with Andrew Garfield. But, this movie has some good things about it. Sandman is great. Thomas Hayden Church.
Most people would say that's about it.
Yeah, I mean...
New Goblin?
No, that wasn't good.
He's the rocket racer, man.
Topher Grace, come on.
Well, that was
Dancing Down the Street Disco, come on. That's pretty bad, overall. My number 4 is Shrek the Third. And this is a series that rebounded with the fourth one. I know neither of you have seen it. I like the fourth one a lot. It presents the Rumpelstiltskin story. Shrek the Third, your favorite characters are still there. You've got your Puss in Boots, Gingy, Fiona, of course, but it's a really bad movie. It's just not that funny. It's a full-on retread of pretty much the second one, so not a huge fan of that. Number 3 is another kids movie, actually. There's a lot of bad third kids movies, and the fourth one of this will be out this Christmas.
Uh-oh.
Justin, any ideas?
Alvin and the Chipmunks.
Chipwrecked is my number 3 film, and I love the first Alvin and the Chipmunks movie. It made me cry. David Cross is really funny in it. I loved it. The second one is pretty bad. The third one is basically unwatchable. It's awful. The fact that David Cross and Jason Lee even agreed to return for it is ridiculous. Number 2 for me is Transformers: Dark of the Moon.
Ooh.
Not a huge fan of the series in general. The first one's pretty good. The fourth one's all right. Second one I never ended up seeing because I heard it was so bad. But I was getting free movies at the theater by the time the third one was out. So I figured, all right, well, I'll watch it. And it was really, really awful. I can't really think of anything good to say about it. There's one okay scene that was kind of like a comedic scene. But I don't go to Transformers movies to get a good laugh, so that doesn't really do much for me. So that's my number 2. Joe, let's hear from you on 5 through 2, the worst number 3s.
I'm going to start this one off also, Dan, with Spider-Man 3.
Oh, okay.
I actually do think there are some good things about this movie, honestly. I actually even liked it when it came out.
I did too.
Which is really weird in retrospect because it's one of those movies you grow to hate more and more. But the biggest reason I dislike this movie is because I really liked the plot line for Spider-Man 4 because my favorite villain is the Vulture, and he would have been played by John Malkovich.
Oh, wow.
So this should have needed to happen. But
I'm sorry.
No, please, contribute.
No, I feel like if they had given Raimi the chance, he would have compensated.
No, I mean, the cool thing about Raimi is he always did his best when he was focusing on like the classic 60s stuff and kind of keeping in that campy feel, which is fine. But they tried to force in Venom, which he was unfamiliar with, and it just was part of the reason the movie was really
way too overstuffed.
Too much going on, and but there were good things about it, but it just was a complete sabotage of the whole thing. Now, number 4 would actually be Home Alone 3.
Because, never saw it.
Because, Home Alone 1 and 2 are both great movies, but if you're going to make a third one and you have this weird, convoluted spy thing, which doesn't even have Macaulay Culkin in it because I guess he was too old at that point.
Yeah.
It was just like...
You can't leave him home alone at 16. That's not as exciting.
I mean, it could be... Disturbia? I don't know. It could be, but it just... I don't know. It was garbage. I mean, it was direct-to-DVD garbage, but, it's tainting everything. My number 3 is kind of fitting for something coming up, as well as the list itself, is Jurassic Park 3. Because,
Okay.
see, Jurassic Park 1 is amazing. Jurassic Park 2 is fun. It's not bad. Jurassic Park 3 is no. It's just no. It's stupid. It's so much sabotage.
Well, here's the biggest issue with Jurassic Park 3.
Please tell me.
The people who worked on Jurassic Park 3 basically took everything from the first book that they didn't put into the first two movies and basically wrote fan fiction.
Yeah, it was just like a bunch of ramshackle scenes. It has some of the worst scenes in cinema. Like, I mean, you've got the raptor talking to Dr. Allen. You know, you've got people. You've got the comedic bit where they're hiding from the dinosaur because he ate the phone, and that alerts them when it rings. You've got Laura Dern breaking up with Sam Neill, even though that's a travesty. You know, their characters should have stayed together.
That was sad.
And didn't need to happen.
Why? I know.
And no Goldblum. You know, even worse. So number 2 is T3. It's god awful. I mean, I'm sorry. No.
Rise of the Machines.
There were like a couple elements that might have been salvageable, but it's just basically kind of trying to take the best parts of T2 and makes it into a parody of itself. A really, really bad parody of itself, and it's completely stupid. Salvation is a boring movie, but at least it was trying to be smarter than this.
No, it was at least trying to find a way to make T3 work. It's just T3 left everybody with nothing to do.
No, it just kind of stops the whole thing dead in its tracks. And I actually think that's kind of where a lot of the problems since then with the franchise have been felt, because T3 just totally derailed everything tonally and story-wise.
All right, Justin, how about for you?
Well, I got to thank you. I totally forgot about Home Alone 3, and I totally forgot about Chipwrecked.
Shipwrecked is so bad.
I think I might have to leave Chipwrecked as my dishonorable mention, actually.
The one with the chipettes, or is it the second one?
That is the second one.
Second one's with the chipettes, although they do appear in the third one as well.
Yes.
I thought that looked horrible, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, actually.
Oh, man.
Number 5, Alien 3.
No.
Now, a lot of people consider this to be David Fincher's worst movie. I will forever give that to the game. Sorry, Joe.
You know, that's not true, though, but go ahead.
Here's the issue with this movie. Aliens basically worked as like a really solid action movie where like there was bad things that happened, but you had this sense of hope. Alien 3 is like, nope, don't care. Everyone gets ruined and dies horribly.
Spoilers.
It's basically a complete bashing to everything that the series has set forth thus far prior to the third installment. I think it has its moments at times. And I don't think it's necessarily a terrible movie. It's just downright nihilistic, and I completely understand Lance Henriksen's statements on how much he hates it. Number 4 is Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines.
Yay.
I was debating whether or not to have this at 5, but there's a little bit of personal bias on this one. It was my first ever R-rated movie I saw in the theater.
Good for you.
And whoa, Nelly, I wish it wasn't.
Is that, you know, it was R-rated.
It was rated R, yes.
You know what? I wouldn't believe it. It seems like a total PG-13 to me.
But, wow, it basically found every way to negate what James Cameron had set up to this point. Completely contradicts T2. Its villain is pretty much boring. And for the most part, nothing it says or has to say is all that interesting. It's just a dry, depressing, uninteresting movie with lots of action that they hope is interesting, and it isn't.
But have you ever played the game, though?
No. I'm assuming it's much worse.
Far worse.
Number 3 is Rambo 3. It's terrible, but it's kind of awesomely terrible, which is why I can't put it much higher. I don't think anyone will say that any of the sequels past First Blood are actually good movies.
Well, there's only 2 sequels. Well, I guess
there's
sequels.
4.
4 now.
There's 4, and according to Stallone, there's going to be 5. This one is like, hey, let's throw in a bunch of totally non-PC things, and in a very strange subplot that in modern day is just ridiculous and gets weirder and weirder and weirder upon retrospect. And number 2, Transformers: Dark of the Moon.
That's so bad.
Where I'll give this one pity points is it's better than Revenge of the Fallen.
That's what everyone said.
Here's the bad news. That wouldn't take much. This movie... Oh boy, where do I start? They promised there would be far more compelling stuff in this time. They were going to try and come up with a more interesting story. They tried to throw a history motif into it, which was ridiculous. The choice for replacement for Megan Fox was worse. And they tried to kill off the most likable character in the movie, which almost caused me to walk out. It is a nightmare. They should have ended it on this one. I'm shocked they didn't.
Yeah, but 4 was a lot better than this.
It was better.
4 was slightly better.
No.
Oh yes.
Yeah, it's a little better than that.
This one I gave a D. 4 I gave a C minus. So I mean, it's an improvement, but it's still pretty bad.
All right. Well, before I get to my number 1, as we do on these lists sometimes, as we go through, sometimes you think of things that you didn't put on your list. I'm going to give a dishonorable mention to a movie from earlier this year called Taken 3.
Oh.
It is horrible.
It's a bad movie.
In so many ways.
I didn't fail it like Justin, but it is bad. It would definitely appear on my top 5 if I had thought of it. But my number 1 is Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. I hate this movie so much. Now, keep in mind, it was the second one I had seen. I never saw the first one until after I saw 2 and 3, which I don't know why I even watched the first one after that, because 2 and 3 are progressively... 2's like okay.
Yeah, 2's watchable.
3 is awful. I had no connection to any of the characters. It's like 3 hours long. I was dragged to it by friends, so I had to see it in theaters, so I couldn't leave. It was just... I hate it so much. And I know everybody hates 4. I think 4 is an improvement over this just because of how much I hate At World's End.
Wow.
Joe?
My number 1 is kind of a joke, because I do have a real number 1, but American Ninja 3. If you want to get technical, American Ninja 3 is probably the worst third movie of any franchise I've ever seen. Now, I like the first movie. It's pretty good, B movie. Second movie's all right, kind of entertaining. But the third movie, they just do it without Michael Dudikoff. And so if you just completely change the character, it's kind of like Home Alone 3.
I was going to say.
It's not even the same franchise anymore. So they did that for the rest of the franchise, and who cares? And it can't do that.
Fair enough.
But in all reality, though, I really think that Transformers 3 is just god-awful. I mean, it was so bad that we made an event, like, saying, okay, we have to do this. This is like what... So there are certain movies, of course, like, during the summer, these franchises we have to see. We all get together in groups to see them. Now, I do agree, Justin, that Revenge of the Fallen was far worse. But this was still really bad. And it was so bad, we all went out together, and we abandoned one of our friends to go home because we didn't tell him what we were going to do afterwards. And then 2 of us went out and got completely drunk afterwards.
Oh, wow.
Because it was... No other movie has really been that bad. So that kind of takes the cake.
Okay. Justin, how about for you?
My number 1, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to either of you, X-Men The Last Stand.
You hate it so much.
It's cheesy for it.
Brett Ratner destroyed what could have been an awesome franchise. He added in a bunch of different character arcs that ruined everything that Bryan Singer had set forth. Characters randomly were killed off. There were plot points that made no sense whatsoever. Joe's favorite line is laughable, but it's probably the only decent line in the entire movie.
It's just one of the few, yeah.
It is... All I can say is thank goodness for X-Men Days of Future Past to completely retcon this movie. Because if not, I would still probably be writing to Brett Ratner asking for a public apology for this movie, because this is an abomination of sequels.
What a petition. You should try it.
All right, well, good list. All terrible movies.
Pretty bad.
I've never seen Home Alone 3.
You don't really need to.
I never saw Alien 3 either. Some of these I just have avoided just from the...
Not really necessary to watch.
No, I wouldn't think so. I don't think any of these are necessary. Well, Chipwrecked, I mean...
Alien 3 you could justify.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's move into our triple feature of older films. And we start that with our new classic, Cuban Fury. And this is one we reviewed last year on the show. Justin and I were the only ones that had gotten to see this one. So, Joe, it's your first time through on Cuban Fury. Let's hear from you.
Beneath Bruce Garrett, that would be Nick Frost, his underconfident, overweight exterior, rather, the passionate heart of a salsa king lies rather dormant. Now, one woman we meet in the office is about to reignite his Latin fire. Because a long time ago, he rejected the art of salsa dancing because he was beaten up by other kids, and he was embarrassed by it. But he was inspired by love to reclaim that skill again.
That's right.
And reconnect with his roots. What a fun movie. You guys talked about this one a while back, and I thought it sounded okay, but I wasn't really, chomping at the bit to go see it. But, Nick Frost really proves that he can kind of carry the movie pretty much by himself without his buddy Simon Pegg, which was good to see, which was really funny. There was just a lot of great lines here. I thought seeing Chris O'Dowd as the bad guy, just this really scummy like coworker who's just trying to interject his romance at every turn, and they kind of make the dancing integrated as almost combat in a way, which is hilarious too. Everything it's kind of funny when you see movies where there's a theme to the world and everything is catered around to that theme. In this movie universe, salsa dancing is number one. If you're a salsa dancer,
it's your weapon of choice.
That's the best thing you can possibly be. And I like that when the movie just kind of completely owns that. And like, this is a movie about salsa dancing, and we're going to get Nick Frost to learn these moves and do it. And he sells it. And I think that's really, really awesome. And the dancing is really good, which is better than I could say about movies that are actually supposed to be about dancing, like some other movies we've seen recently. Come on.
Many. Battle of the Year, Step Up.
Like, I would argue that some of the dancing here is better than a lot of those movies, honestly. And I'm not even really into salsa. I don't know that much about it. But it was funny. It was a good story. Really great watch. I really enjoyed it. I leave it with a B+.
Okay. Justin?
Well, while Cuban Fury is far from high concept material, what ultimately makes it work is Nick Frost as the leading man. He plays a likable character, but keeps him straightforward enough to let all the supporting cast have their moments. Even if O'Dowd may be overdoing it as the nemesis, trying to prove his jerkiness in almost every single scene. Some of which are really funny, other times are like, we get it already, on to the next scene, please.
Evil.
The world, as you mentioned, Joe, defined by salsa is interesting. I don't think the fight scenes, quote unquote, are always effective, though I'll be darned if they aren't ridiculously fun to watch in the process. But I feel like it's also that over-the-top nature that keeps it fun and lively. It's only effective about half the time, I'd mention, and one character that we brought up in our original review could easily be construed as offensive, but I'd still say Cuban Fury is a comedy with enough spring in its step to warrant a viewing it if viewers are willing to buy into this world. I leave it with a B.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a fun movie. I think it's pretty original.
Yeah, actually.
And you get these really good performances from Frost and O'Dowd. Rashida Jones as the love interest is also good. But Frost and O'Dowd are really going outside of their regular roles here, which I like. And I really like that Nick Frost is not your typical romantic lead at all. He's not a Hugh Grant. He's not a Clooney. It actually reminded me of like when Sandler tries to do like a romance, except a lot better. Because Sandler movies go like way over the top. He's with Jennifer Aniston. He's with, he's with the hottest babes imaginable. This is a little more realistic. Rashida Jones is very beautiful, but you could see this happening. One thing I don't like though is, and Justin hit on this, O'Dowd's character is too much of a jerk. You need an underdog and a bully, but he really takes it to extremes. And I can't say it's his performance, Justin. I believe it's the way his character is written. I think he did a good job with the script, but it's definitely too far. And I will say, we talked about the Bejan character a lot when we first watched it. That's the gay character in the movie. Is he offensive? I don't find him offensive. But on the first go-around, I just thought he was kind of annoying. Here, I actually got on board a little more with his character.
Interesting.
I actually kind of liked his character a little more this time.
Any particular reason why, just out of curiosity?
All the Back to the Future references?
Maybe because I was sort of bracing myself that, Bijan's going to be coming up again. But when we saw it for the first time, I didn't know what to expect. That's true. He's just so abrasive that it does come on a little bit strong. But this time, I guess I was expecting the abrasiveness, and so when he came out, I was like, well, I guess he's not that bad. He does have some good lines.
He's eccentric.
And, certainly he and Frost, have a good back and forth. I believe, Joe, you liked his character.
Yeah, he had a lot of great lines. He was probably one of the best characters in the movie for me. Okay. I liked him. I didn't find him particularly offensive.
Yeah, I don't think he's an offensive character. I just didn't think he was funny the first time around. Here, I sort of got on board a little bit more with what he was all about, I guess. Ian McShane, I thought, was great here.
Oh, yeah.
He has possibly the best scene in the movie.
Do that impression.
When they're in the back of the bar playing the trivia game. But I leave Cuban Fury with a B+. Glad you got to see this one, Joe.
It was good.
Yeah. You're right. On the surface, it doesn't really sound like
That
a movie that you'd want to like rush out and see.
No, but it's not bad.
No.
It's really not bad.
No, it's very good. And we had a friend with us watching it, and he seemed to enjoy it as well.
He did.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, let's move right into our old classic, which is Justin's pick for the week. That was Snatch.
Jason Statham plays Turkish, an underground boxing promoter, desperately trying to make a better living, and reluctantly ends up pulled into the world of fixing matches, courtesy of a man known as Bricktop, played by Alan Ford. However, when their fighter is beaten senseless by a mush-mouthed gypsy named Mickey, played by Brad Pitt in a wonderful supporting role, Turkish must convince him to fight, or he'll end up in worse trouble than he ever imagined, all while an assortment of characters fight over the take from a diamond heist. Ritchie's original directing style is something in and of itself. He's very experimental, but he had all these interesting ideas of fusing all these characters, and even though they weren't always the best written, having fun with them. That's what I really loved about this and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. You genuinely are interested in these characters and how they're going to actually enter the world of this story. And I feel like because of that, it's filled with all these bizarre and quirky moments. And we have Statham as almost a deadpan moderator to the whole event. And I feel like for the most part it works. Seeing how all these intertwine with some really great bits, some experimental editing, which does and doesn't work. We'll come back to that. But for the most part remains intriguing and engaging. However, I do think Ritchie's direction gets a little frenetic, most notably in the first 20 minutes where he's trying to introduce everybody all at once. And not every cutaway to a different story is the most effective. For example, I always found Turkish's story the most interesting, but there are others that just drag in spots and you keep waiting for them to get back, and sometimes it's a longer wait than others. But for the most part, I think Snatch is a fun, multi-layered story that I think continues to prove that Jason Statham is far more than the angry British guy who punches people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's well worth a look. I leave it with a B.
Yeah, this is like the Statham comedy show. How are the two non-Holmes films I've seen by Guy Ritchie, though? The horrible train wreck that is Rock and Rolla, which I gave an F to. I hate that movie. And this. Completely on two opposite sides of the spectrum. Snatch is clever, funny, original, memorable. There's a great plot here. Actors that are all on board. Everything works about it, not the least of which is the 1-2 punch of Pitt and Benicio del Toro. I thought they were the two real strong ones. Statham's good as well, of course. But I actually really like Ritchie's frantic editing. I think it pays off in spades here. I think it really keeps everything lively. I do admit the intro to everybody very quickly is a bit jarring, but it is in line with the tone of the movie, I feel like. I think you need to watch it with the subtitles on, as we did. I'm not sure how I would have felt about seeing this in a theater and scratching my head on the way out, having not understood a good third of the dialogue. I'm actually surprised you're so low on it, Justin. I loved it. It's an A.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Joe?
I think that the only real negative I could say to the movie, I do agree there was that fast-paced, frantic editing you guys mentioned, but that was very common in like the late 90s and early 2000s.
Which trope.
I always kind of like that style, especially with these like really gritty, fast-paced action crime thriller things that were kind of all the rage around this time. Mm-hmm. A lot of people tried to imitate Snatch and Lock, Stock.
Oh, yeah.
But I like Lock, Stock a lot, and so I finally got to see Snatch. I'd never seen it before.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I really... But I mean, that if that was the biggest negative for me, that's really a stylistic thing that I was actually kind of okay with. The only other negative I could think of was I wanted to know more about these characters, which means the movie did its job well, and it's an A+. Because I love this movie.
I honestly, I teetered on A+. I really did.
I think this movie's great.
Justin, I'm shocked that you're the one that brought this and are a full letter grade lower than us.
It happens.
Well, for starters, I saw this after Lock, Stock, and I think Lock, Stock is so much funnier and has such a more raw quality to it. And I think it's that raw quality that makes it more effective. The experimental editing, I think it spots it works really well. I think the music video style cut to deciding one major decision over a rabbit chase is a little bit over the top.
It's a little on the nose, but...
I also think that Benicio del Toro departed way too soon. But also, probably the other big thing is, like I mentioned, I feel like we got to some people's stories faster than we got to others, and because of that, I do feel like there were times where it felt like you were waiting for the next big interesting thing to happen rather than enjoying every single storyline as a collective whole.
I think it was fairly interesting all the way through.
I agree. I kind of liked all the stories. I wanted more of them.
Yeah.
There
are a lot of characters, maybe too many.
Possibly.
And that's why I guess we don't really get to the nitty-gritty of all of them. So that might be an issue. But it didn't really detract me, from the movie that much. Now, I haven't seen Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. This was my first, like I said, non-rock and roller, John Holmes, porn star, non-Sherlock Holmes, Guy Ritchie movie. So, maybe if I had seen that one first, maybe I would like this one a little bit less. I don't know, but I think this one's great. Now, you've seen both, Joe.
Yeah, I think Lock, Stock is a much funnier movie, but I liked the grittiness of this one a little bit more. I thought it was pretty well balanced between the action and the drama and the comedy. I just like the way it all synced up perfectly. Lock, Stock, I think, I agree it's a little more raw, but I think you can tell that the director's still finding himself a little bit there, experimenting a bit. But I do agree, Lock, Stock, I think, is a funnier movie. And one thing I will say, you do know those characters a bit more. But Lock, Stock's probably right up there with this one. I think they're both great.
Different characters, though, right?
Yeah, different. Some different.
More or less. I mean, Jason Statham's playing essentially the same character, but...
Yeah,
okay.
That's why it's
like... I know you called this a spiritual sequel.
Yeah.
It's almost like in the same universe-esque kind of...
More or less. I know Leonard Maltin considers this one basically a sequel to Lock, Stock.
It's pretty much everyone considers it.
Okay.
So you could tell.
I mean, I do enjoy this movie on a number of different levels. It's just... Do I think it's as good as Lock, Stock? I really can't say the same. I think it's easier to follow, and I think there are some ridiculously funny moments, particularly Brad Pitt's character.
Oh, he's great.
He's hilarious.
He's great in this, and in most things. Yeah. Both of the Brad Pitt movies... Well, anytime Justin brings a Brad Pitt movie to Old Classic, it's good, because he does not care for the man. Seven is an A+, of course, and this is like an A right on that line of A+.
So it must be good.
I guess Thelma and Louise is right around the corner then.
Yeah, I mean, what a movie.
That's a good one.
But, all right, well, good choice, Justin.
Thank you.
All right, and we're going to get to our final movie now, and that is the Oscar-nominated film Away from Her. We are just... 2 movies now, one after this one, and we are done the A's, finally, gentlemen, for the Oscar A to Z. So we're going to do a mini-sode about our favorite in the A letters. But first up, we do have that movie, Away from Her. It's a 2007 film nominated for Best Actress and Best Adapted Screenplay. This is a drama film starring Gordon Pinsent and Julie Christie as an elderly Ontario couple, Grant and Fiona, when Fiona starts showing symptoms of Alzheimer's. She rapidly declines over the next few months, and the couple decide to put her in a home, but with a heavy heart, because one of the rules of the facility they pick is that Grant cannot visit her for the first 30 days to get her acclimated to the new situation. By the time he does visit her in 1 month, not only does she not know who he is, but she's taken a liking to another patient in the home, Aubrey, played by Michael Murphy. Grant even turns to Aubrey's wife, played by Olympia Dukakis, for support. A while back on the show, when we did our top 10 directorial debuts of the 2000s, one of my selections was Away from Her's Sarah Polley, who also wrote the nominated screenplay. The choice was obvious for me to put on the list. Polley has a natural vision to let the mood of the characters and the situation permeate each scene and allow the gifted actors to do the rest. Christie, whose last movie we reviewed on Film Fanatics, was one of Joe's favorites, actually, Afterglow. Another Oscar nominee.
Such a winner, right?
Joe and I both failed, actually. It's horrible. Horrible movie. But here, Christie gives a truly indelible performance, and the movie never once veers into sappy, and it so easily could. It's always authentic here. It reminds me a lot of another nominee we covered, Amour, in its honest dealing with a lifelong married couple going through losing a partner. Now, it may be a bit more dry than Still Alice, which is, of course, the most recent film to deal with Alzheimer's, and early scenes with Pinsent and Dukakis are a little bit confusing getting to know their relationship, but honestly, it is a great film worth seeking out. I leave it with an A-. Joe?
I agree, Dan. It's a very naturalistic film, and you really do feel a lot for the characters, and I think the actors just do a great job of emanating that. I mean, you really do find it very believable, and that's the movie's greatest strength. I mean, really, with the exception of the fact that the interplay with Aubrey's wife was a little confusing early on because it was like a weird time jump.
It was.
And then it took me a couple times to realize, oh, wait, this is taking place after what we initially saw. I feel like there could have been a different way to edit that around because that really threw me like, who is this person he's randomly talking to?
Yeah.
That kind of
It's
bugged
Polly's
me.
one flaw in her directing, I think.
Yeah, that was really weird.
Yeah.
Or maybe that was an editing thing. But overall, though, I thought it was an excellent film. I do think I like Still Alice a little better.
I do as well.
Performances were a little better. And I think that... And they also got a little more focus into what was actually going on with her. Though this one offers a different perspective with the partner kind of suffering.
Right.
A little more, which is it's different, but maybe not quite as bad. Still, I think it's an excellent movie, and I leave it with an A.
Okay. Very good. Justin?
There's no question that losing a loved one is hard. Watching a loved one fade away slowly is downright heartbreaking. But it's that emotional chord that director Polly finds and strikes perfectly. Away from Her is a character study that really shows what's driving these characters. Christie's slow decline and Pinsent's desperate fight to hold on to anything. Both giving, I would happily argue, more than worthy Oscar performances. Both of them are absolutely powerful in their roles, and watching how these two characters come together is both beautiful, emotional, and devastating at times. I do think that some of the other connections to some of the other characters aren't always as effective, but in the end, I feel like it's still that core emotional stride that makes Away from Her as truly compelling cinematic entertainment. I leave it with an A.
Okay, so for you, better than Still Alice.
Oh, easily.
Okay. I did not find it better, but I will say this. It does offer a completely different take on it, because if they have kids, they're not brought up. Still Alice, she was young enough that the kids were still in their lives a lot. It was more a family-based tale of the Alzheimer's, where this is really just them, and he is just losing everything. I do wish, though, that I was confused about the Aubrey's wife and him. I didn't get that was a time jump thing either. I wasn't even sure who she was for a little. I thought she was the neighbor. That's why I couldn't quite give it an A. I wish that was a little bit more fleshed out, but it's definitely a good movie. Two really great movies, about this heartbreaking subject. You said it, Justin. It's just it's devastating. Awful. It's awful. And I think both of them hit it authentically in their own way.
I was going to say, it's different, but it's the right kind of different.
Yeah.
And what I love about this one is it doesn't take sides. It really lets these characters live their lives in ways that are believable and real and and understandable, most importantly.
Yeah. And I would argue more heartbreaking here for her husband than for Alec Baldwin in Still Alice. Because he's got to come and watch her at the home be with this other guy.
Oh, yeah.
Because she just doesn't have a clue who he is. And I think that is, of the two movies, that's probably the one most heartbreaking thing of all.
I don't really understand that policy, though.
They tried to explain it a little bit in the movie. I don't know if that is a Canadian... I've never heard of that before.
I didn't know. That just didn't sound realistic, and if it is, I don't know if I'd agree with it, because I think you generally would want to have...
Your loved ones with there.
As much as possible to keep your mind connected to that.
And even the nurse says in the movie played by Nina
she's
Dobrev,
questioning it a little
bit. She's like off the record. I think it's kind of a stupid policy as well.
I just didn't get that at all.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand that.
Yeah. I feel like it's probably legitimate, though.
Probably.
It's probably grounded in some sort of realism that there are facilities that do that.
Yeah, but it's
it wouldn't be the first questionable.
It's not like you're, going through addiction or something, like no contact with the outside for a month. Yeah. That kind of makes sense.
Right. No, I do think it's a dumb policy, but at least they touch on that in the movie about how it is sort of a weird policy.
True.
Yeah, rather than gloss over. But all right, well, good. Glad you guys enjoyed that. Worthy of me putting it on the top 10 directorial debuts.
Absolutely, Dan.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought she did a real good job. And we've seen her in some films. She was in Go. She's been in... I don't know if she's been in anything else we've reviewed on the show, but...
No.
She's been acting since she was like 6. So she pops up. All right, well, that is going to do it for the show this week. Summer is in full swing and lots of things to catch on Joe's Merlin channel. So we'll see you back here next week. Thanks so much for listening. And you can check us out on Facebook, Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, or Twitter at Film Fanatics Pod. Bye!